Christy Hemme, to many, she's an iconic figure in the world of professional wrestling, a name synonymous with glam, talent, and charisma. But what lies beneath the glitzy exterior? What happens when the lights go down? The cameras stop rolling, and the ring becomes a place of uncertainty, pain, and sacrifice. This is the story of Christy Hemme, an evolution from a model to a wrestling sensation. But it's not all spotlight and fame. Behind the polished image lies a darker reality, a side that not many get to see. In the unforgiving world of wrestling, where every match is a battle, not just against opponents, but against your own body and mind, Christy faced challenges that tested more than just her strength. Today, we take you on a journey to explore the darker side of the wrestling ring, a side few dare to speak of, the unseen struggles of one of wrestling's most memorable women. Christy Hemme's journey wasn't all about fame and victory. In fact, it's the struggles, the defeats, and the pain that truly shaped her. From injury to self-doubt, her story is one of perseverance, resilience, and finding a voice amid a world that often tried to silence her. Christy Hemme's story didn't begin inside the squared circle. Before stepping into the world of professional wrestling, she was a model, a beauty pageant contestant, and someone who quickly became a familiar face to millions. She seemed to have it all: youth, beauty, and ambition. But what people didn't see was the quiet struggles, the yearning for something more, something deeper than what her image alone could offer. As a model, Christy often felt reduced to being just another face, just another figure in a sea of beauty. It wasn't until she found wrestling that she began to discover her true power. When Christy Hemme entered WWE in the early 2000s, she was catapulted into the spotlight, first through her appearance in the 2004 Diva search competition. She had no prior wrestling experience, but her charisma and fierce determination quickly won over fans. Christy had a presence that made people take notice, not just her looks, but her personality. However, the glamour of wrestling came with its own set of challenges. The ring wasn't just a place for performances. It was a battleground. Christy's early days in WWE were not filled with easy matches and applause. She quickly learned how brutal the world of professional wrestling could be, both physically and mentally. Behind the scenes, Christy faced pressure from all sides. The wrestling business is notorious for its demanding schedule, long hours on the road, and intense physical toll. For someone like Christy, who had just entered the industry, the struggle wasn't just in the ring. It was in adapting to a completely new environment. There was the constant pressure to prove herself, to be more than just another pretty face. She was aware that people didn't see her as an athlete at first. They saw her as a model turned wrestler, a role that carried its own set of assumptions. But it wasn't just the fans or the industry that made her question herself. Christy's own insecurities began to surface. She had to fight not only to gain respect, but also to prove to herself that she wasn't defined by her image or her past. It was a battle of self-acceptance and growth, one that would push her further than she ever thought possible. She was in a race to evolve from the girl who had once been part of a beauty pageant to the fierce woman who could stand toe-to-toe with some of the biggest names in the wrestling world. Injuries also became a part of her story. Christy had a reputation for taking risks in the ring, sometimes pushing her body past its limits. It wasn't long before the toll of the physical demands began to show. Each injury left its mark on her both physically and mentally, adding another layer to the weight she carried. And yet, despite it all, Christy pushed forward. She refused to let her circumstances define her, continuing to work harder, train longer, and fight fiercer than ever before. It was during this time of personal growth and struggle that Christy began to realize something vital. The wrestling ring wasn't just a place to showcase her strength. It was a place to showcase her resilience. She wasn't just fighting opponents in the ring. She was fighting to become someone who could finally stand proud. Not only as a wrestler, but as a woman who had conquered her own doubts and fears. As Christy Hemme's wrestling career continued, she was thrust into a high-pressure world where success was often measured in injuries, betrayals, and constant doubt. The WWE Universe watched her grow in front of their eyes. But the struggle behind the scenes was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The wrestling business had a way of testing people, stripping them down to their raw selves. Christy wasn't just fighting opponents. She was fighting against an industry that seemed to eat people alive, chewing them up and spitting them out. As she rose through the ranks, Christy's confidence began to waver, despite her growing fan base. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being taken seriously. The industry often reduced her to a pretty face or a diva, when all she wanted was to be recognized as an athlete. This feeling of being constantly overlooked took a mental toll, especially when she faced other women wrestlers who seemed to have the world at their feet. Women like Trish Stratus, Lita, and Victoria were dominating the division, and Christy found herself struggling to keep up. The media and even her fellow wrestlers would sometimes treat her as a novelty, a distraction, rather than a legitimate contender. It made her question whether she would ever truly earn her place among the greats. But perhaps the most intense conflict for Christy came in the form of an injury that would change the trajectory of her career. After a particularly brutal match, she sustained a neck injury, an injury so severe that it nearly ended her career. This was the turning point, the moment when Christy's world seemed to crumble. The damage to her neck required surgery, and it meant months of recovery. For someone who had built a career out of physicality, it was a devastating blow. But as Christy lay on the hospital bed, the reality of her situation began to settle in. She was forced to confront the hard truth. Wrestling wasn't just a career, it was her identity. Losing it meant losing a part of herself. While recovering, Christy had plenty of time to reflect on everything that had led her to this point. The broken bones, the bruised ego, the isolation from being away from her friends and fellow wrestlers, it all piled up, weighing on her. There was a frustration of watching others climb the ladder while she sat on the sidelines. Worse yet, there was the haunting question, would anyone remember her once she was gone? Christy had always worked hard to carve out her place in wrestling, but the nature of the industry was unforgiving. Would the fans forget her as easily as they had embraced her? During this time, Christy's internal battle intensified. She questioned whether her career was worth the sacrifice. Could she truly return to the ring after everything she had been through? Could she keep fighting, knowing that the physical toll might continue to damage her body? And more importantly, could she return and finally be recognized for what she truly was, a wrestler? Not just a pretty face. It was during this moment of self-doubt that Christy came to an important realization. She couldn't control the opinions of others, nor could she change the way the industry viewed her. But what she could control was her own narrative. She realized that wrestling wasn't about fitting into anyone's mold or meeting expectations. It was about finding her own voice. She was never going to be just another diva or another model-turned-wrestler. Christy Hemme was a wrestler, a tough, resilient, determined woman who had bled, sweat, and fought her way to the top with this newfound resolve. Christy made the decision to return to the ring. She was no longer the girl who had been unsure of her place in the business. She had faced adversity, confronted her doubts, and emerged stronger. The comeback wasn't easy. Wrestling with an injury was a daunting challenge, and the recovery process was painful. But Christy fought through the pain, and when she finally made her return, it wasn't just for herself. It was for every woman who had ever been underestimated, every person who had ever struggled to prove their worth. She was ready to stand tall, no matter what. Her return to the ring was nothing short of triumphant. She faced her own fears head-on, battling not only her opponents, but also the voice of doubt that had plagued her mind. It was a reminder to herself and the world that the wrestling ring didn't just belong to the strongest. It belonged to those who were willing to fight, to persevere, and to never give up, no matter the odds. Christy Hemme's journey was never easy. The road was filled with injuries, personal struggles, and moments of doubt, but it was also filled with victories, both big and small. In the end, Christy's story was not just about wrestling. It was about resilience, self-discovery, and the courage to keep fighting. Even when everything seemed impossible, her legacy in the wrestling world was secured, not by the victories in the ring, but by the battles she fought outside of it. She wasn't just a part of the WWE. She had become a symbol of strength, perseverance, and unwavering determination. As Christy Hemme's career continued, the struggles she'd faced never truly disappeared, but she had become stronger with each passing year. The injury that once threatened to end everything now served as a reminder of just how far she had come. The setbacks, the doubts, the challenges, each one had shaped her, leaving an indelible mark on her career and her character. While Christy had made a name for herself in the ring, her real victory was in how she overcame the darker moments of her journey. The scars from her injuries, both physical and emotional, told the story of someone who had refused to quit. She had fought not just for her spot in the ring, but for her own peace of mind. After years of competing and wrestling with her own identity, Christy Hemme began to reflect on the woman she had become. She had witnessed the evolution of the WWE, the rise and fall of many superstars, and the changing landscape of women's wrestling. But through it all, Christy had maintained her sense of purpose. She wasn't just a former diva or a model-turned-wrestler. She was an icon, a trailblazer in her own right. While she may not have always been the top champion, Christy's place in wrestling history was secured in another way. She had shown the world that women in wrestling were more than just eye candy. They were athletes, they were fighters, and they had stories to tell. Christy's final years in the ring were not marked by the same physical dominance that she had shown early on, but rather by her presence, her influence, and her unwavering commitment to the sport. She began to shift her focus away from the spotlight and toward giving back to the industry that had given her so much. She mentored younger wrestlers, sharing her experiences, her wisdom, and her unfiltered perspective on the realities of the business. She helped them navigate the pitfalls that she had once faced, showing them that success in wrestling wasn't just about winning matches. It was about maintaining your identity and your integrity, no matter the challenges. While Christy would eventually step away from the ring for good, she did so on her own terms. It wasn't the end of her career that defined her. It was the way she had carried herself throughout. She had been through the darkness, and now she could see the light. Christy knew that her journey, though not always easy, had made her into the person she was meant to be: strong, self-aware, and unapologetically herself. When fans look back on Christy Hemme's career, they didn't just remember the glamour, the beauty, or the matches. They remembered the resilience, the determination, and the incredible woman who had faced the harshest realities of professional wrestling and come out the other side stronger for it. Christy wasn't just a wrestler. She was a symbol of what it meant to rise above adversity, to find strength in vulnerability, and to never stop fighting. Even when it seemed like the world was stacked against her, her legacy wasn't built on the matches she won, but on the battles she fought outside of the ring. The world of professional wrestling was brutal and unforgiving, but Christy Hemme had proven that even in its darkest corners, there was always room for someone willing to stand up and show the world who they really were. Christy's story wasn't just about wrestling. It was about life, about the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. And in the end, that was the most powerful victory of all. As the final bell rings and the lights fade out, Christy Hemme stands tall, not just as a wrestling icon, but as a woman who overcame every challenge that life threw her way. Her legacy isn't just etched in the WWE archives, it's carved into the hearts of every fan who witnessed her growth, her struggle, and her eventual triumph. Christy's journey was never about the accolades or the titles. It was about her unyielding spirit to prove that she was more than the sum of her past. She was a warrior, a fighter, and most importantly, a survivor. Her story will always be a reminder that in wrestling and in life, it's not about how many times you fall. It's about how many times you get back up and keep fighting.